The coffee hit the saucer with a crack that made 3 tables turn. Maya Torres didn't flinch. She'd heard worse sounds in the 7 months she'd worked at Henderson's diner, plates shattering in the kitchen, her manager's voice cutting through the lunch rush, the rattle of her 12-year-old Honda refusing to start in the parking lot. But this sound was different. It carried intention. "This is cold," the man said, not looking up from his phone, "and I asked for it black. There's cream in this." Maya looked at the cup. The coffee was steaming, small wisps of vapor rising into the air-conditioned space. There was no cream, just the faint ring of residue from the previous wash cycle that every server at Henderson's knew to ignore because Jerry, the owner, refused to replace the ancient dishwasher. The machine was a Hobart from 1987, and Jerry treated it like a family member who'd earned the right to decline slowly rather than be replaced with something more efficient. "I'll bring you a fresh cup, sir," Maya said, her voice level. She'd learned in her first week that apologies invited more complaints. Efficiency ended conversations. "That's not the point." The man finally looked up. He was maybe 50, with the kind of haircut that cost more than Maya's monthly car insurance and a watch that caught the fluorescent lights like a challenge. His suit was charcoal grey, perfectly tailored, the kind of garment that whispered money rather than shouting it. "The point is, attention to detail. You bring me what I ordered, exactly as I ordered it, or you don't bring me anything at all." 3 businessmen at the corner booth had stopped talking. They were regulars, every Tuesday at 11:30 for the past 4 months. Maya knew their orders without asking. Club sandwich, no mayo, patty melt with extra onions, chicken Caesar salad dressing on the side. The couple with the toddler near the window were pretending not to listen, but the woman's hand had frozen halfway to her mouth, her fork suspended in air, a piece of pancake trembling on the tines. Even the line cook, Carlos, had paused in the kitchen window, his spatula held mid-flip. Maya felt the familiar heat creeping up her neck, not embarrassment, but something older and more tired. The feeling of being tested by someone who already knew the answers. She'd felt it in high school when her AP economics teacher had asked her to explain supply and demand curves in front of the class, knowing full well that Maya had missed the previous week's lessons because she'd been working double shifts to help her mother with rent. She'd felt it during her college admissions interview when the alumnus had asked how she planned to balance academics with other responsibilities, the phrase dripping with assumptions about first-generation students. "I understand, sir. I'll get you a new cup right away." "Will you?" The man leaned back in his booth, and Maya recognized the posture. Her economics professor had it, that particular slouch of someone accustomed to people waiting for their next words. "Because I've been watching you for the past 20 minutes. You took that table's order." He gestured to the businessman. "And you wrote down everything without asking a single clarifying question. You delivered food to 4 different tables without checking back once. You're going through motions, not actually paying attention." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Maya's hand tightened on her order pad, the spiral binding pressing into her palm. Through the kitchen window, she could see Carlos glancing out, his eyebrows raised in question. Behind him, Jenny, the other morning server, had stopped wiping down the prep station. Even Mr. Patterson, who came in every day at 7 a.m. for decaf and wheat toast and never looked up from his crossword puzzle, had his pen hovering above the newspaper. "You're right," Maya said, and watched the man's expression shift, a tiny recalibration, like he'd expected defense instead of agreement. "I didn't check back with those tables. They've all been coming here for years. Mr. Patterson gets decaf after 2 p.m. because of his heart medication. The couple at table 7 split everything and need extra napkins because their daughter's teething. And those businessmen," she nodded toward the corner booth, "they're here every Tuesday. They tip exactly 15%, and they don't like to be interrupted during their meeting." She paused, letting the information settle. Table 3, the woman in the blue cardigan. She's diabetic and always asks for sugar-free syrup, so I bring it without her having to request it. The construction crew by the counter. They're working on the new development on Maple Street, and they need to be in and out in 30 minutes, so I put their order in before I even bring them menus. That's not going through motions. That's paying attention. The man's eyes narrowed. So you're saying you don't need to do your job properly because you think you know better? I'm saying I am doing my job, just not the way you think it should be done. Maya. Jerry's voice cut across the diner. He was standing by the register, his apron stained with grease from the morning's breakfast rush, his expression somewhere between warning and resignation. She'd seen that look before, usually right before he told her to let something go, to smile and move on, to remember that the customer was always right even when they were so clearly wrong. It made her want to scream. Jerry had owned Henderson's for 23 years. He'd bought it from the original Henderson, a man named Bill, who'd opened the place in 1962 and had run it until a stroke forced him to sell. Jerry had kept the name, kept most of the menu, kept the same green vinyl booths and black and white checkered floor. He'd also kept the same philosophy. The customer might not always be right, but they were always the customer, and without customers there was no diner. But the man held up his hand. No, Jerry, let her talk. This is interesting. He turned back to Maya with something that might have been amusement or might have been cruelty. At this point in her shift, she was too tired to tell the difference. You think you're doing your job well? I know I am. Then here's a proposal. The man pulled his phone closer, opened what looked like a notes app. The screen reflected in his glasses for a moment, some kind of spreadsheet, numbers in neat columns. I'm going to order something specific and detailed. If you get it exactly right, and I mean exactly every single element, I'll leave you $1,000 tip and walk out of here. The diner had gone completely silent now. Even the kitchen sounds seemed muted. The dishwasher had stopped its rhythmic clanking. The coffee maker's gurgling hiss faded into background static. Maya could hear the clock above the counter ticking, a sound she'd never noticed before in 7 months of shifts. And if I don't? Maya asked. Then you admit you're not as good at this as you think you are, in front of everyone here. He gestured around the diner with casual confidence. And I'd like you to consider that maybe the problem isn't customers having high standards. Maybe the problem is you've convinced yourself that mediocrity is acceptable. Maya felt something cold settle in her stomach. She thought about the textbooks stacked on her passenger seat, each one representing a shift she'd worked to afford it. Introduction to Business Management, $47 used from Amazon, purchased after a week of double shifts. Principles of Marketing, $63 from the campus bookstore because the professor required the latest edition. Financial Accounting, rented for the semester because buying it would have meant choosing between books and car insurance. She thought about her mother's voice on the phone last week, carefully not asking if Maya needed money, carefully not mentioning that her little sister's school trip was coming up, a week in Washington, D.C. for Rosa's 8th grade civics class, $500 that their mother was trying to piece together from overtime shifts at the hospital laundry. She thought about her checking account, which had $87 until Friday, and her credit card, which had nothing left at all because she'd used it to fix the Honda's alternator last month. $1,000 would mean books for next semester, gas money, maybe even enough left over to fix the Honda's transmission before it gave out completely, maybe enough to help with Rosa's trip without her mother having to ask. "What do you want to order?" she asked. The man smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who'd just confirmed a hypothesis. 2 eggs, sunny side up but not runny. The whites should be completely set, but the yolk should still be liquid enough to break with a fork. Rye toast, lightly toasted on one side only, with butter already spread, not melted on. Spread while the bread is cold so it doesn't soak in. Hash browns, well done but not crispy, with diced onions cooked until they're translucent but not caramelized, mixed in before the final cook, not after. And coffee, obviously black, in a cup that has been rinsed with hot water first so the ceramic doesn't cool the coffee on contact. Bring it all at once, and everything should be the correct temperature when it arrives at my table. Maya wrote it down. Her handwriting was steady even though her mind was racing through the logistics. Carlos could do the eggs. He had the steadiest hand in the kitchen, the result of 15 years cooking in various diners across 3 states. The toast would be tricky because their toaster only worked on both sides. A design flaw Jerry had been meaning to fix for 5 years. The hash browns were the real problem. They always made them crispy, cooked in a large batch every morning and kept warm on the griddle, because that's what most customers wanted, and it was more efficient than making individual portions. "One more thing," the man said. "You have 20 minutes, starting now." He pressed something on his phone, a timer probably, and set it face up on the table where Maya could see the numbers counting down. 19:59, 19:58, 19:57. Maya didn't run to the kitchen. Running showed panic, and panic led to mistakes. She walked with purpose, her mind already 3 steps ahead, calculating timing and temperature and the exact words she'd need to use to convince Carlos and Jerry that this wasn't just another difficult customer. This was something else entirely. Behind her, she heard the murmur of conversation resume, lower and more urgent than before. Someone said, "That's Richard Caldwell. He owns Caldwell Technologies. He's worth like millions." Someone else said, "She's never going to get it right. He's just being cruel." A third voice, older and raspier, probably Mr. Patterson, "I've seen her work. If anyone can do it, she can." Maya pushed through the kitchen doors. She had 19 minutes and 42 seconds to prove them all wrong, and the rent was due in 6 days. And somewhere in the background of her mind, beneath the immediate pressure and the familiar weight of being underestimated, a small, stubborn part of her was already thinking, "Watch me." The kitchen smelled like it always did. Coffee and bacon grease, dish soap and the faint metallic tang of the industrial refrigerator. Carlos was at the grill, flipping pancakes for table 5. Jenny was loading dirty plates into the dishwasher, her movements automatic and efficient. Carlos looked up from the grill when Maya came through the doors, and she could see him reading her face. 7 months working together had taught them a wordless language. The difference between rush-hour stress and personal crisis, between annoying customers and the kind that left marks. "I need your best work," she said, sliding the ticket across the prep counter. 2 sunny-side eggs, whites completely set, yolk liquid, but not runny. He picked up the ticket, read it, then looked past her through the kitchen window to where Richard Caldwell sat with his phone and his expensive watch and his casual cruelty. "That's the tech guy. My cousin worked at one of his companies. Said he fired 20 people before Christmas last year. Restructuring, they called it. My cousin had 2 kids and a mortgage. Can you do the eggs?" "Of course I can do the eggs." Carlos's pride was a reliable thing. He'd been cooking since he was 14, learning from his grandmother in Guadalajara before moving north to work in restaurant kitchens from San Diego to Portland. "What's this about?" "He's testing me. If I get it exactly right, $1,000 tip." "And if you don't?" Maya didn't answer. She was already moving to the toast station, pulling out 2 slices of rye from the bread drawer. The toaster was an ancient Proctor Silex that Jerry had bought used in 2003, and it had exactly 2 settings, barely warm or charcoal. Getting one side toasted while leaving the other side soft would require timing and maybe some prayer. Jerry appeared at her elbow, wiping his hands on his apron. "Maya, what the hell is going on out there?" "A customer ordered food. I'm making food." "That customer is Richard Caldwell. He owns half the commercial real estate in this town. We can't afford to... To what? Maya turned to face him and Jerry took a small step back. She wasn't angry exactly, but there was something sharp in her expression that made him reconsider his words. To let him humiliate your staff, to watch him turn this place into his personal entertainment, to lose his business, Jerry said quietly. He meets clients here twice a month. Each time they order for 6 or 8 people. He tips well. If he decides Henderson's isn't good enough for him, then you'll get different customers. Maya put the bread in the toaster, counted 3 seconds, hit the lever. She'd watched the mechanism enough times to know that if she pressed the lever at a slight angle, one heating element engaged before the other. It was a trick she'd learned by accident during a particularly slow Sunday shift. I need you to let me cook the hash browns separately, not the usual batch, just this order. Maya, you're not a cook. I've been watching Carlos for 7 months. I know how to work a griddle. She met his eyes. Please, Jerry, just this once, let me do my job the way I know it needs to be done. Something in her voice must have reached him, because Jerry sighed, the kind of exhale that carried decades of small compromises and almost arguments. His shoulders dropped slightly, and Maya saw the tiredness there, the weight of running a business that was always one bad month away from closing, of competing with chain restaurants that had marketing budgets and consistency, of trying to maintain standards while keeping prices low enough that regular people could afford breakfast. Fine, but if he complains, he won't. She hoped that was true. The kitchen fell into a rhythm that felt almost like music. Carlos cracked the eggs with precision, watching the whites spread in the buttered pan. He'd heated the pan to exactly the right temperature, hot enough that the edges set immediately, but not so hot that they browned. Maya diced onions with the knife she'd sharpened last week, her cuts even and quick. The repetitive motion was meditative, the sound of the knife against the cutting board a steady percussion beneath the ambient noise of the kitchen. The toast popped up, one side golden, the other pale, and she grabbed the butter from the fridge, not the counter, spreading it cold just like Caldwell had specified. The butter was hard, resistant, and she had to work it across the bread in small strokes, careful not to tear the soft interior. 12 minutes, Carlos called out, glancing at the clock above the prep station. The hash browns were the puzzle. Henderson's made them in a large batch every morning, cooked until crispy because that's what most customers wanted, and it was more efficient than making individual portions. But Caldwell wanted them well done, without the crispy edges, which meant a different approach entirely. Maya heated a separate section of the griddle to medium-low, added oil, and spread the shredded potatoes thin. The onions went in early, giving them time to soften without browning. "You're actually doing it," Jenny said from the doorway. She'd come in for the dinner shift early and had apparently heard about the challenge. "Everyone's watching through the window. It's like a cooking show out there. Some guy has his phone out recording everything." "Not helping, Jenny. I'm just saying, no pressure or anything, but half the diner has their phones out. Someone's probably live streaming this. You're going to be famous." "Or humiliated," Maya muttered, flipping the hash browns. The potatoes were cooking evenly, the onions turning translucent. She could smell them, sweet and savory, the kind of smell that made people hungry. "Either way, I need you to stop talking and let me focus." Jenny retreated, but Maya could feel the weight of attention pressing through the kitchen window. She forced herself not to look, to focus on the food and the timer and the precise specifications Caldwell had outlined. Carlos plated the eggs with the care of a surgeon. The yolks sat perfect and unbroken, twin domes of orange gold. The whites were completely set, without a single brown edge, uniform and pristine. He'd used fresh butter in the pan, and the edges had that delicate lace pattern that came from perfectly controlled heat. "Beautiful," Maya said. "I know." Carlos didn't smile, but there was pride in his voice. "What time?" 8 minutes left." The toast went on the plate next to the eggs, butter side up, the untoasted side showing pale and soft. Maya used a spatula to transfer the hash browns, checking that the onions were translucent, that the potatoes had the right texture, cooked through but not crispy. She arranged them carefully, creating a small mound that looked deliberate rather than haphazard. "Coffee," she said, grabbing a clean cup from the rack. She ran hot water from the espresso machine into it. They didn't have a separate hot water tap, so she had to use the steam wand, letting water run through until it came out clear and hot. She swirled it around to heat the ceramic, dumped it out. Fresh coffee went in, black and steaming, the surface perfect and unbroken. 2 minutes, Carlos said, and there was tension in his voice that hadn't been there before. Maya looked at the plate. Everything was right. She could feel it in the same way she knew when a table was about to leave or when someone was going to complain before they opened their mouth. This was muscle memory and observation, and 7 months of doing this job well enough that nobody noticed, which had always been the point until today. She picked up the plate with her left hand, the coffee in her right, and pushed through the kitchen doors. The diner had rearranged itself in her absence. People had shifted in their seats to get a better view. The businessmen's meeting had apparently paused entirely. Their paperwork was pushed aside, their attention fully on Maya. The couple with the toddler had their phones out, recording. Even Mr. Patterson, who usually read his newspaper with religious focus, had folded it and set it aside, his crossword puzzle abandoned mid-word. Maya walked to Caldwell's table with steady steps. She set the plate down first, then the coffee, both movements controlled and deliberate. The plate made a soft sound against the tabletop, ceramic on laminate, a sound she'd heard thousands of times. The coffee sat perfectly level, not a drop spilled. Caldwell looked at the food. He didn't touch it immediately, just studied it like an art appraiser checking for forgeries. His eyes moved from the eggs to the toast to the hash browns, checking proportions and presentation. He leaned forward slightly, and Maya could see him examining the eggs for any hint of browning on the whites, checking the toast for uneven toasting, looking at the hash browns for signs of overcooking. Finally, he picked up his fork. Cut into the eggs. The yolk broke perfectly, running liquid but not watery across the plate, a rich orange gold that caught the light. He tried the whites, completely set, no translucency, no wobble, tasted the hash browns, chewing slowly, checking for the texture of the onions, examined both sides of the toast, confirming that one side was toasted and the other wasn't. Took a sip of coffee, holding it in his mouth for a moment before swallowing. The diner held its breath. Maya stood there, her order pad still in her apron pocket. Her hands steady, even though her heart was doing something complicated and painful in her chest. She'd done everything right. She knew she had. But there was always the possibility that right wasn't good enough, that Caldwell would find some microscopic flaw and use it to prove his point. Seconds stretched into what felt like minutes. "Well," Caldwell said, setting down his fork, "I'll be damned." He pulled out his wallet, leather, well-worn, the kind that held cards and cash and probably important business cards for people Maya would never meet. He counted out $100 bills, crisp and new, and set them on the table beside the plate with the kind of care usually reserved for signing contracts. "You've got attention to detail. I was wrong about that." Maya looked at the money. $1,000, more than she made in 3 weeks of shifts, even with tips, enough to change the shape of the next month, the next semester, maybe the next year. She could pay rent and have money left over. She could buy books without choosing between editions. She could help with Rosa's school trip without it being a burden. "Thank you," she said, "because that's what you said when someone gave you money, even when they'd made you earn it by turning your competence into a public spectacle. But you're wasting it here." Caldwell took another bite of eggs, and Maya realized he was actually going to eat the food. that this hadn't just been a test with no stakes for him. He was hungry, and the eggs were good. And he was the kind of person who ordered something and then consumed it. You could do better than this place. I'm putting myself through college, Maya said. This job works with my schedule. What are you studying? Business administration. I want to open my own restaurant someday. Caldwell laughed, but it wasn't quite cruel this time. It was almost rueful, like he was remembering something from his own past. A restaurant? That's a terrible business model. 50% fail in the first year, 75% within 5 years. You'd be better off. He stopped, seeming to reconsider. Actually, come work for me. I need someone to manage operations at my downtown office, someone who pays attention, who doesn't need to be told how to think 3 steps ahead. Salary, benefits, better hours than this. Maya felt the room shift around her. Jerry was standing by the register, his expression unreadable. Carlos had come out of the kitchen, his apron still on, his arms crossed over his chest. Jenny was staring with undisguised envy. The businessmen were leaning forward in their booth. Even the toddler had stopped fussing, as if sensing that something important was happening. I appreciate the offer, Maya said carefully, but I'm happy where I am. Happy? Caldwell gestured around the diner. The cracked vinyl booths that Jerry kept meaning to reupholster, the flickering light above table 4 that had been broken for 6 months, the faint smell of old grease that no amount of cleaning could quite eliminate. Here? Yes, Maya said, and realized as she said it that it was partly true and partly a lie, and she wasn't quite sure which parts were which. Here. She picked up the $100 bills, folded them carefully, and put them in her apron pocket. The weight of them felt significant, like they meant something beyond just money. Then she walked back to the kitchen, past the staring customers and the phones and the weight of expectations she hadn't asked for, and pushed through the doors to where Carlos was waiting with a high five, and Jerry was shaking his head with something that might have been respect or might have been resignation. Outside, through the window, she could see Caldwell eating his perfectly prepared breakfast with methodical focus. He didn't look angry or disappointed. He looked like someone who'd confirmed a hypothesis and was now calculating the next variable in an equation she couldn't see. Maya's shift ended in 4 hours. She had 19 pages of microeconomics to read tonight and a paper due Friday on market structures and competitive advantage. The $1,000 in her pocket felt heavy and strange, and like the kind of solution that created new problems. But for now, she had tables to serve and orders to take, and the familiar rhythm of work that asked nothing of her except precision, efficiency, and the ability to keep moving even when the world was watching. She tied her apron tighter and went back to work. The story hit social media before Maya's shift even ended. Someone had filmed the whole thing. Probably the businessman in the corner booth with the newest iPhone, judging from the video quality. By the time she clocked out at 9 p.m., Waitress Silence's arrogant CEO had 17,000 shares on Facebook and was climbing on TikTok under the tag, "Wah, Waitress win." Maya watched the video once, sitting in her Honda in the dark parking lot, her phone screen casting blue light across her face. The video had been edited, cut to show just the highlights, Caldwell's challenge, her calm response, the kitchen sequence filmed through the pass-through window, and finally, the moment he counted out the money. Someone had added dramatic music, something orchestral and building toward a crescendo. The comments were what she expected. Half the people calling her a hero, the other half analyzing every frame for mistakes she'd supposedly made. Someone had freeze-framed the moment she set the plate down, zooming in on her expression, trying to read triumph or fear or whatever narrative they needed her to be feeling. "She's so calm. I would have freaked out. That CEO is an asshole. Why would he do that to her? She should have spit in his food. Rich people like that deserve it." Actually inspiring. She didn't let him intimidate her. This is staged. Nobody makes eggs that perfect in 20 minutes. Maya scrolled until she found the negative comments, the ones that felt like stones in her stomach. She didn't even thank him properly. So ungrateful. I would have taken that job offer in a heartbeat. She's stupid. Typical entitled millennial. Gets handed $1,000 and still complains. She turned the phone off and drove home. Her apartment was a studio in a complex on the east side of town, the kind of place where the rent was cheap because the neighborhood was transitioning, which meant half the buildings were being renovated for people who didn't live there yet, and the other half housed people who'd been there for decades and couldn't afford to leave. Maya's unit was on the 3rd floor. No elevator, with a window that looked out onto the parking lot and a radiator that clanked all night during winter like it was trying to communicate in Morse code. She climbed the stairs slowly, her feet aching from the shift. Her body knew the route by heart now. 23 steps to the first landing, turn left, 17 more steps, another turn, 18 steps to her floor. She could do it in the dark if needed, and sometimes did when the hallway lights burned out and the landlord took his time replacing them. Inside her apartment, the air was stale and warm. She'd forgotten to crack the window before leaving for her morning shift, and the heat from the day had accumulated. She set the $1,000 on her kitchen counter, 10 bills in a neat stack, and stared at them while she microwaved leftover rice and beans in a Tupperware container that had lost its lid months ago. The money was real. The rent was due Friday. She could pay it and still have enough left for books, for gas, for the transmission repair her mechanic had warned her about. She could send some to her mother for Rosa's school trip without being asked. But Caldwell's offer sat in her mind like a splinter, small and irritating and impossible to ignore. Her phone buzzed, a text from her mother. "Saw the video, are you okay?" Maya typed back, "Fine, just tired." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. That man was rude to you. He paid well. Money isn't everything, Mija. Maya looked at the $1,000, thought about her mother's own long shifts at the hospital laundry, the way she'd worked doubles to keep Maya and her sister fed and in decent schools, the way she'd never complained, never acted like sacrifice was anything other than what you did for the people you loved. Money wasn't everything, but it was something specific and powerful and hard to dismiss when you'd grown up watching your mother count pennies. "I know, Mom. I'll call you tomorrow." "Okay, I love you. Love you too." She ate her rice and beans standing at the counter, scrolling through the comments on her phone, even though she'd promised herself she wouldn't. Most people were supportive, calling her brave or skilled or inspiring. But there was a thread that made her pause. A conversation between 2 users who seemed to know more than they should. User 1. "That's Henderson's Diner on 4th Street. My brother works there. Says she's always like that, super focused, never messes up orders." User 2. "She should work somewhere better. That place is a dump." User 1. "She's in school, needs flexible hours." User 2. "Still, that CEO was right. She's wasting her talent." Maya set the phone down, but the words lingered, wasting her talent, as if talent was a finite resource that could be used up, depleted, squandered on the wrong opportunities, as if she didn't have reasons for her choices, considerations and constraints that people watching a 2-minute video couldn't possibly understand. She went to bed, but sleep came slowly. She kept replaying the moment Caldwell had offered her the job, the way he'd said it, like he was doing her a favor, like Henderson's Diner was obviously beneath someone with her abilities. The assumption that she'd want to leave, that better money and better hours automatically meant a better life. What did he know about her life? About the way she'd structured her schedule so she could take morning classes and work afternoon shifts? About the relationship she'd built with Jerry, who let her switch shifts when she had exams, who'd fronted her pay once when her car broke down and she needed the repair money before payday? About Carlos, who'd taught her knife skills during slow periods, who'd shared his grandmother's recipes and told her stories about running a kitchen. But then again, what did any of that matter if she was struggling? If she was one car repair away from financial disaster, one unexpected expense from having to drop a class or defer a semester? The next morning, Maya woke to her alarm at 5:30 and got ready for her opening shift. The morning routine was automatic now. Shower with the water pressure that fluctuated between trickle and torrent. Coffee made in the 4-cup maker she'd bought at a thrift store. Grab the textbooks from her passenger seat to study during her break. Drive to Henderson's through empty streets, while the sun was still just a suggestion on the horizon. The city looked different at this hour, softer and more forgiving. The light was grey and gentle, and there were fewer cars on the road. Maya liked the quiet, the way the world felt like it belonged to a select few people who were awake to see it. The delivery trucks making their rounds, the runners doing their early morning miles, the shift workers like her who moved through the darkness toward work that needed to be done. Jerry was already there, prepping the coffee station. He looked up when she came in. "You doing okay?" "Fine. That video's getting around. Had 3 reporters call yesterday asking for interviews with you. TV stations, newspapers, some podcast I'd never heard of." "What did you tell them?" "That you were off duty and I didn't give out personal information." Jerry poured himself coffee, added 3 sugars like always, stirred it with one of the plastic stirrers that came in a box of 500. "But they'll probably show up here. Might be good for business. Or might be a circus." "That too." He studied her for a moment. His eyes were tired, the kind of tired that came from decades of early mornings and late nights, from the constant stress of running a small business in a world that favored chains and franchises. "You thinking about taking Caldwell's offer?" "No." "Why not?" "Because I don't work for people who test me to prove a point." She said it firmly, but as soon as the words were out, she wondered if they were true. Wasn't college just a series of tests? Wasn't life? Maybe the difference was in how the tests were framed, whether they felt like opportunities to prove yourself or opportunities to be humiliated. Jerry nodded slowly. "That's fair. But you know, sometimes the people who test us hardest are the ones who see something in us worth testing. Not saying Caldwell was right to do it the way he did, but maybe he saw what I see, someone who's too good at this to be doing it forever." "I'm not doing it forever. I'm working towards something." "I know you are." Jerry sipped his coffee. "Just make sure you're not so busy working towards something that you miss other opportunities along the way." The morning shift started normally enough. Mr. Patterson came in at 7 for his usual decaf and wheat toast, settling into his regular booth with the morning crossword puzzle. The contractors from the development down the street filled the corner booths, their voices loud and jovial, still waking up with the help of coffee and jokes. Maya moved through her tables with the rhythm she'd perfected over months, taking orders and delivering food and refilling coffee cups with a precision that felt almost automatic. But there was a new tension in the air. Customers who'd seen the video, who watched her work with more attention than usual, who seemed disappointed when she didn't do anything extraordinary. A woman at table 6 asked for her autograph, which felt surreal and vaguely embarrassing. A teenager wanted a selfie with her, posting it immediately to Instagram with the caption, "With the waitress who owned that CEO show legend." At 8:30, Richard Caldwell walked through the door. Maya was refilling coffee at table 4 when she saw him. For a moment, she considered asking Jenny to take his table to avoid the awkwardness of serving someone who'd made her a job offer she'd turned down. But that would be cowardice. And Maya had never been a coward. He took the same booth as yesterday, pulled out his phone, and waited. Jerry shot her a look that said, "Your call," and Maya walked over with a menu she knew he wouldn't need. "Morning," she said. "Good morning, Maya." Caldwell set his phone down, and she noticed that his hands looked older than his face, the skin weathered and marked with small scars. Working hands, despite the expensive clothes and the corporate title. I wanted to apologize. I was unnecessarily harsh yesterday. You were testing me. I was, but that doesn't make it acceptable. He looked different in morning light, older, more tired around the eyes, less like a villain from a viral video and more like a person. I have a bad habit of treating the world like a business negotiation. My ex-wife pointed it out frequently. Maya didn't sit down, but she didn't walk away either. Why did you come back? Because I meant what I said about the job offer, and because I realized I didn't actually give you a business card, which is a terrible way to make an employment offer. He pulled a card from his pocket, set it on the table. Cream-colored cardstock, embossed lettering. If you change your mind, I won't. That's what I thought you'd say. Caldwell smiled slightly. You know what I see when I look at you? I see someone who's excellent at something she doesn't actually care about. This job, you're good at it, maybe too good, but it's not what you want to be doing. I'm putting myself through college. I know. Business administration, future restaurant owner, it's a nice dream. He said it gently, but the words still landed like a slap. But dreams need capital, experience, connections. Working here gives you one of those things, maybe. My company could give you all three. Maya felt something tight and angry in her chest. You don't know anything about my dreams. You're right, I don't. Caldwell leaned back in the booth, his expression thoughtful rather than condescending. But I know about capital and experience and connections because I started with none of them. I was 22 once, working 3 jobs to pay for night school, convinced that hard work and good intentions would be enough. And they weren't. They were necessary, but not sufficient. He picked up the menu, scanned it without really reading. I'll have the usual. 2 eggs, rye toast, hash browns, coffee, but you can make them however the kitchen normally does. No tests today. Maya took the order, walked back to the kitchen, and clipped the ticket to the line. Carlos glanced at it, then at her. He come back to apologize? Sort of. You taking the job? No. Why not? Maya didn't answer because she wasn't sure herself. Part of it was pride. She didn't want to work for someone who'd humiliated her publicly, even if he'd paid well for the privilege. Part of it was fear of leaving what she knew for something uncertain. And part of it was a small, stubborn voice that said if she took the job, it would mean Caldwell had been right about everything. But what if he was right? What if she was wasting her talent, spinning her wheels in a job that led nowhere, confusing motion with progress? The shift continued. Lunch rush came and went. Maya served tables, took orders, delivered food with the precision that had become automatic. But she kept touching the business card in her pocket, feeling the weight of possibility. At 2 p.m. during her break, she sat in her Honda and finally called her mother. Mija, you sound tired. I am tired. Maya stared at the dashboard, at the check engine light that had been on for 3 months, at the crack in the windshield that spread a little more each time the temperature changed. The CEO came back. He offered me a job again. Her mother was quiet for a moment. What kind of job? Operations manager at his tech company. Better pay, better hours, benefits. And you're calling me because I don't know if I should take it. Why wouldn't you? Maya tried to find the words. Because he was cruel to me. Because it feels like giving in. Because I'm supposed to be working toward opening my own place, not working for someone else's company. Mija, her mother said gently, you're 22 years old. You have time for a lot of different jobs before you open your own restaurant. And if this job pays better and gives you experience and connections, those things matter. But what about pride? Pride doesn't pay rent. Her mother's voice was firm but not unkind. "I'm proud of you every single day. You work hard, you're smart, you have goals. But being proud doesn't mean making things harder on yourself just to prove a point. What if I fail? What if I take this job and I'm terrible at it? Then you'll learn something and find something else. That's life, Mija. We try things. Some work, some don't. But we don't learn anything by staying in the same place forever." After they hung up, Maya sat in the car for another 10 minutes. Watching people come and go from the diner, she thought about Caldwell's words, excellent at something she doesn't care about. It wasn't quite true. She did care about doing her job well, but he was right that this wasn't her dream. This was the thing she did to get to her dream. She pulled out the business card, looked at the embossed letters, Richard Caldwell, CEO, Caldwell Technologies. A phone number, an email address, a physical address downtown in one of those new glass buildings that reflected the sky. Maya had planned her life carefully. Finish her degree, save enough for a small space, maybe partner with an experienced chef, build something from the ground up. It was a good plan, a solid plan, the kind of plan that made sense when you wrote it down. But plans were just maps, and maps didn't account for unexpected roads. She started the car and drove back to her apartment, the business card still in her hand, the weight of decision pressing down like weather. That evening, Maya sat at her kitchen table with a notebook and a calculator. She wrote down her current expenses: rent, utilities, car insurance, gas, groceries, textbooks. Then she estimated what the new job might pay. Caldwell had said better pay, but she didn't have specific numbers. Even a modest increase would make a difference. Health insurance alone would save her money. Right now, she was on a high-deductible plan through the state exchange, the cheapest option available, which covered almost nothing until she hit $5,000 out of pocket. She made a list of pros and cons, the way her business textbook had taught her to analyze decisions. Pros: more money, benefits, experience, connections, resume builder, potential for advancement. Cons: leaving a job she knew, working for someone who'd humiliated her, uncertainty, fear of failure. The lists weren't equal, and Maya knew it. The practical advantages outweighed the emotional resistance, but knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally were different things. She closed the notebook and looked around her apartment. The studio had been her home for 18 months now, and she'd tried to make it feel like more than just a place to sleep between shifts. There was a poster on the wall, a vintage advertisement for a French bistro that she'd bought at a thrift store because it reminded her of why she was doing all this. There was a bookshelf made from cinder blocks and boards, holding her textbooks and a few novels she read during rare free moments. There was a small kitchen table where she ate her meals alone, studying while she chewed, maximizing every minute. This apartment represented her independence, her progress, her ability to make it work on her own terms. But it also represented her limits, the constraints she lived within, the constant calculations of what she could and couldn't afford. Maya went to bed that night, still uncertain, but somewhere between consciousness and sleep, a realization settled over her. She wasn't afraid of taking the job. She was afraid of admitting that she needed it, that her current path wasn't sustainable, that accepting help from someone who tested her didn't make her weak. The next morning, she woke with a clarity that felt almost physical. She got ready for her shift, drove to Henderson's, and worked her morning tables with the same precision she always had. But during her break, she pulled out her phone and composed an email. "Mr. Caldwell, I'd like to discuss the position you mentioned. Please let me know when you're available to talk. Maya Torres." She hit send before she could second-guess herself. The response came within an hour. "Tomorrow, 2 p.m., my office. Looking forward to it." Maya stared at the email for a long moment, feeling the weight of what she'd just set in motion. Then she went back to work, serving tables and taking orders, and moving through the familiar rhythms of a job she was about to leave behind. Maya gave her notice to Jerry on Thursday morning. 2 weeks, she said, because that was professional and because she wanted to leave properly. Jerry took it better than she expected. He shook her hand, told her she'd been one of his best servers, and said the job would be there if things didn't work out. "They'll work out," Maya said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "I hope so. But you know how to work a grill if you need a fallback." Jerry smiled slightly. "That hash brown thing you did was impressive. Carlos is still talking about it." Ma. Her last 2 weeks at Henderson's felt simultaneously too long and too short. Customers who'd seen the video came in specifically to see her, to take photos, to leave generous tips as if they were funding her next chapter. Maya accepted the attention with grace, but it felt strange to be celebrated for a job she was leaving. Carlos threw her a small going-away party on her last shift. Nothing elaborate, just a cake from the grocery store and some balloons tied to her favorite booth. Jenny gave her a framed photo of the staff standing in front of the diner. Even Mr. Patterson shook her hand and wished her well, telling her she'd better not forget where she came from. "I won't," Maya promised, and meant it. Her first day at Caldwell Technologies was a Monday in early March. The office was everything Henderson's diner wasn't: glass and steel, climate-controlled, with a coffee station that had 6 different options and didn't require anyone to rinse the pot between uses. There was a reception area with sleek furniture and abstract art on the walls. There was a conference room visible through glass walls, currently occupied by people in business casual attire, having what looked like an intense discussion. Maya's new title was Operations Coordinator, which Caldwell explained meant she'd be managing logistics, vendor relationships, and internal systems, making sure the moving parts of the company actually moved smoothly. "Think of it like running a restaurant," he said during her orientation, walking her through the office space. "Except instead of food, we're delivering software solutions. Same principles: timing, quality control, attention to customer needs." Her desk was in an open office plan, surrounded by developers and project managers who'd been with Caldwell for years. The space was bright and modern, with adjustable standing desks and ergonomic chairs and dual monitors at every workstation. Maya's setup looked out toward the city, and through the window she could see the skyline stretching toward the horizon. The salary was $48,000 a year, more than double what she'd made at the diner. The benefits included health insurance, which meant Maya could finally go to the dentist for the first time in 3 years. There was a 401k with employer matching, paid time off, and tuition reimbursement for job-related courses. On paper, it was everything she needed. But that first week, Maya felt like she was learning a new language where everyone else was already fluent. The other employees were friendly but busy, speaking in acronyms and references to company history she didn't have. People talked about sprints and iterations, about client deliverables and stakeholder management, using terms that Maya had to Google on her phone during bathroom breaks. "Don't worry," said Tessa, one of the senior project managers who'd been assigned to help Maya on board. Tessa was maybe 30, with the kind of confidence that came from years of knowing exactly what she was doing. "Everyone feels overwhelmed at first. Just ask questions. Richard values people who ask questions more than people who pretend they know everything." But asking questions meant admitting what she didn't know, and Maya had spent so long being good at her job that being a beginner felt like failure. At Henderson's, she'd known every customer's preferences, every quirk of the kitchen equipment, every shortcut that saved time without sacrificing quality. Here, she didn't even know where they kept the office supplies. The work itself was challenging in ways that had nothing to do with difficulty. Managing vendor contracts required negotiation skills she was still developing, knowing when to push for better terms and when to accept what was offered. Coordinating between departments meant navigating personalities and priorities that sometimes conflicted. The development team wanted more time for testing. The sales team wanted features delivered faster. The finance team wanted everything done cheaper. Maya's job was to find the balance, to make everyone feel heard while still moving projects forward. And working directly with Caldwell meant learning to read his communication style, blunt to the point of seeming rude, but without the cruelty she'd seen that first day at the diner. He asked direct questions and expected direct answers. He didn't waste time on pleasantries or softening criticism. When something wasn't working, he said so clearly and expected it to be fixed quickly. "You're being too accommodating," he told her during their weekly check-in, 3 weeks into the job. They were in his office, a corner space with windows on 2 walls and a desk that looked like it cost more than Maya's car. When the development team says they need another week, you can't just say, "Okay." You need to push back, find out why, see if there's a solution that doesn't blow the timeline. "I'm still learning everyone's working styles, so learn faster." Caldwell said it without malice, just as a statement of expectation. "You're smart enough to do this job, Maya, but you need to stop treating people like customers you're trying to please. These are colleagues, partners. Sometimes you have to tell them no." Maya went home that night and sat in her apartment, the same studio, but now she could afford to keep the heat at a comfortable temperature and buy groceries without calculating every item. She thought about Caldwell's words, about the difference between service and collaboration, about how the skills that had made her excellent at waitressing weren't quite the same skills she needed here. At the diner, her job had been to anticipate needs and fulfill them, to make the customer's experience smooth and effortless. Here, her job was to manage expectations, to negotiate priorities, to sometimes say no in service of larger goals. It required a different kind of confidence, a willingness to assert her own judgment even when people disagreed. The next day, when the development team asked for a timeline extension, Maya scheduled a meeting. She came prepared with data, the client's launch date, the penalty clauses in the contract, the cascading effects on other projects. She listened to the team's reasons, legitimate technical challenges that needed addressing, and asked clarifying questions. Then she said, "I understand the challenges, but we need to find a solution that keeps us on schedule. Let's brainstorm alternatives." They spent an hour working through options. Could they phase the rollout? Could they cut scope on less critical features? Could they bring in a contractor for specialized work? In the end, they found a compromise. They'd deliver the core features on time and follow up with additional enhancements 2 weeks later. It worked. Not perfectly. The client would have preferred everything at once, but it was a solution everyone could live with. And afterward, Marcus, the lead developer, caught her in the break room. "Good meeting," he said, pouring himself coffee from the fancy machine that Maya still hadn't figured out how to use properly. "You're figuring it out." "Figuring what out?" Maya learns that assertiveness requires balance, pushing back without becoming abrasive, and earns respect for challenging decisions others are afraid to question. As she settles into her role, she develops key management skills, reading implicit messages, anticipating problems, managing expectations, and building stronger vendor relationships through understanding rather than pressure. She makes several mistakes along the way, from approving incompatible software to misjudging clients and scheduling conflicts. Instead of punishing her, Caldwell treats these errors as learning opportunities, emphasizing reflection, slowing down, and choosing the right direction over speed. He helps her recognize the shift she's still making, from a service mindset focused on saying yes to a management mindset where sometimes the best decision is saying no. The deeper challenge for Maya is internal. She struggles to reconcile her past identity, where excellence meant mastering a clearly defined environment, with who she is becoming now, where excellence is less concrete and depends on judgment, boundaries, and navigating uncertainty. Maya learns that excellence in her new role means navigating ambiguity, making imperfect decisions, and trusting her judgment without clear answers. Promoted to operations manager, she leads a small team and adapts her management style to each person's strengths and weaknesses, developing skills in feedback, accountability, and leadership. Caldwell later apologizes for how he treated her at the diner, acknowledging that his assumptions were wrong and that her work has tangibly improved the company. This reflection deepens Maya's understanding of how competence can be misjudged when context is ignored. As her life stabilizes, better housing, paid-off debt, growing savings, progress toward her degree, Maya feels both proud and conflicted. Her dream of opening a restaurant feels more distant, even as her corporate work gives her valuable skills she knows will matter someday. Encouraged by her family, she realizes she is not off course, but simply on a longer, more complex path. Reimagining her restaurant dream with greater ambition and realism, Maya understands she is steadily building the experience, confidence, and resources she will need. Though uncertainty remains, she feels capable of shaping her future, and that sense of agency, finally, is enough. The promotion to senior operations manager came in November, 18 months after Maya had started at Caldwell Technologies. With it came another salary increase, $70,000, a number that would have seemed impossible when she was serving coffee at Henderson's and a corner office on the executive floor. "You've earned it," Caldwell said when he offered her the position. "The operational efficiency improvements you've implemented saved us over $200,000 this year. Client satisfaction is up 23%. Your team has the lowest turnover rate in the company." Maya accepted the promotion, but it came with a new challenge. She'd be managing managers now, overseeing not just her original team, but 3 other departments. The scale of responsibility was larger, the decisions more consequential. A mistake wouldn't just delay a project, it could impact the entire company's performance. The first few months were brutal. Maya worked 60-hour weeks, trying to understand the nuances of each department, building relationships with people who'd been with the company longer than she had. She attended strategy meetings where decisions were made about the company's direction, where her input was expected and valued. She learned to read quarterly financial reports, to understand profit margins and revenue projections, to see how operational decisions translated to business outcomes. But she also learned to delegate, to trust her team to handle things without her constant oversight. She learned that micromanaging was a sign of her own insecurity, not a reflection of her team's competence. She learned to focus on the problems that only she could solve, and to let go of the ones that others could handle. One of her first major decisions was to restructure the vendor management process. The current system was inefficient, with different departments negotiating separately with the same vendors, missing opportunities for volume discounts. Maya proposed a centralized approach where her team would handle all vendor relationships, negotiating company-wide contracts that leveraged their combined purchasing power. The proposal met resistance. Department heads who'd previously managed their own vendors felt like they were losing control. The finance team worried about the upfront time investment required to implement the new system. Even Caldwell was skeptical. "It's a big change," he said during the presentation. "Walk me through the risks." Maya had prepared for this. She'd spent weeks modeling different scenarios, talking to vendors about their willingness to negotiate larger contracts, researching how other companies handled similar transitions. "The main risk is disruption during the transition period," she said, pulling up a slide that showed the implementation timeline. "For about 3 months, we'll be running both the old and new systems in parallel, which will create extra work. But after that, we project annual savings of 15 to 20% on vendor contracts, plus improved relationship management, because vendors will have a single point of contact." What if the vendors won't negotiate? I've already had preliminary conversations with our top 10 vendors. 8 of them are interested in discussing consolidated contracts. The other 2 are willing to continue current terms. We're not forcing anyone into a worse position. What if your team can't handle the increased workload? I've built in 2 new positions for the restructure. 1 senior vendor manager and 1 coordinator. The investment pays for itself in less than a year based on projected savings. Caldwell studied the slides, his expression unreadable. Then he looked at Maya with something that might have been approval. You've thought this through. I have. Then do it. But I want monthly progress reports, and if it's not working by month 4, we revert to the old system. Understood. Maya leads a difficult but successful transition to a new vendor management system, facing resistance from department heads, vendors, and her own exhausted team. Through persistence and hands-on leadership, the system delivers major cost savings and operational improvements. Caldwell recognizes her growth, crediting her background and resilience rather than formal training, and reveals he may sell the company, possibly through a management buyout that Maya could join. The idea of ownership unsettles Maya, but also excites her. She researches buyouts, evaluates her finances, and seeks guidance from mentors like Tessa, who encourages her to embrace discomfort as part of growth. Maya realizes she doesn't have to choose between a corporate career and her dream of owning a restaurant. She can build both over time. When the company is eventually sold, Maya receives an equity payout that gives her real financial flexibility. She invests part of it as a silent partner in a small restaurant, gaining ownership experience without full operational risk, and puts the rest into long-term investments. Professionally, she takes on a strategic leadership role at the acquiring company. Reflecting on her journey, from diner server to executive and investor, Maya recognizes that early challenges, especially Caldwell's harsh test of her abilities, reshaped her confidence and trajectory. Not through kindness, but through pressure that revealed her capacity to grow, adapt, and turn challenge into opportunity.